Imagine you are standing on a wall, not just any wall, the one that has not fallen in 1,000 years, the one that has swallowed armies whole, turned invaders into footnotes, and made Constantinople into something approaching myth. You are standing on the Theodosian walls, and the year is 1453. It is the night of May 28th, and below you, stretching as far as your eyes can see in the darkness, there are fires. Tens of thousands of fires. Torches, campfires, lanterns moving like a tide of living stars. Behind those fires are somewhere between 80 and 100,000 Ottoman soldiers. And you have fewer than 7,000 men to hold the entire perimeter of this city. The math is so brutal it almost becomes funny. Almost. You are not a professional soldier. You are a citizen of the greatest city in the world, or at least what was once the greatest city in the world. You have heard the stories your whole life, how Constantinople was the jewel of civilization, the bridge between East and West, the new Rome, the city that God himself would never allow to fall. You were raised on that story. You believed it. And tonight, standing on a wall you have been repairing by hand for 53 days, using rubble, barrels, and sheer stubbornness, you are beginning to wonder if perhaps God has updated his plans without telling you. Below, in the darkness, a drum begins to beat. It is low at first, almost gentle. Then another drum joins, then another, and then the horns. And then, cutting through all of it like a blade through silk, the sound of 100,000 voices rising at once. You grip the stone in front of you. You look to your left, where a Genoese soldier you have never spoken to catches your eye and gives you a nod that says everything words cannot. You look to your right, where a Venetian sailor, a man who came here on his own free will to die alongside strangers, is muttering something under his breath. A prayer, probably. Or a curse. Possibly both. And somewhere behind you, in the streets of a city that has already begun to mourn itself, the last emperor of the Roman world is walking toward you. This is Constantinople's last night. This is the night an empire died. And you were there. Welcome to the time machine. To understand what you are witnessing, you have to understand what Constantinople actually was. Not the romantic idea of it, not the legend, the actual place, with its cracks and its contradictions and its 1,000 years of accumulated glory and accumulated trauma. The city was founded by Emperor Constantine the Great in 324 AD on a strategic peninsula where Europe meets Asia, where the Black Sea bleeds into the Mediterranean through the Bosphorus Strait. Constantine called it the New Rome. He meant it literally. He transplanted the bones of the old empire into this new body and declared it would last forever. For a while he seemed to be right. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, crumbling under the weight of its own ambition and the boots of Germanic tribes, the Eastern Empire, centered on Constantinople, kept going, and going, and going. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople was the most fortified city on earth. Its legendary Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century by Emperor Theodosius II, were a triple-layered system of moats, outer walls, and inner walls that reached up to 12 meters high. Arab armies came and went. Viking raiders stood at the gates and left empty-handed. The city survived plague, civil war, and even a catastrophic sacking by the Fourth Crusade in 1204, carried out in one of history's great ironies by fellow Christians, and still endured. When armies laid siege to Constantinople, history kept sending them home embarrassed. By 1453, however, Constantinople was a ghost wearing a crown. The Black Death had killed nearly half its population between 1346 and 1349. The empire had shrunk to almost nothing. By the time of the siege, Byzantium consisted essentially of the city itself, a few islands, and a region in the Peloponnese. The once bustling metropolis of 500,000 people had contracted to somewhere around 50,000 civilians living among ruins and vacant fields inside the great old walls. Whole neighborhoods lay empty. Churches stood half-crumbling. The wealth was gone. The allies were mostly gone. The army was desperately, almost comically, insufficient. And then came Mehmed. Sultan Mehmed II was 21 years old when he set his sights on Constantinople. 21. At an age when most ambitious young men are making poor decisions about their social lives, Mehmed was redesigning the geopolitics of the known world. He had ascended to the Ottoman throne in 1451, and many European courts made the comfortable mistake of assuming that youth meant weakness. They were wrong in the most consequential way possible. Mehmed was obsessed with Constantinople. He had grown up hearing the Islamic prophecy, attributed to the Prophet Muhammad himself, that the great city would one day fall to Muslim forces and that the commander who achieved this would be blessed. Mehmed intended to be that commander. He spent his evenings, according to Byzantine historian Ducas, drawing sketches of the city by candlelight, mapping the walls, calculating angles of attack, marking where the cannons should be placed. He was 21 years old, and he was doing homework on how to end an empire. His secret weapon was a Hungarian engineer named Urban. Here is one of history's more darkly comic moments. Constantine VII had actually tried to hire Urban first. The engineer came to Constantinople offering his services and his expertise in cannon making. Constantine looked at what Urban was asking to be paid, looked at the Byzantine treasury, which at this point contained approximately hopes and dreams, and politely declined. Urban then walked across to the Ottoman side and offered his services to Mehmed. Mehmed, who did have money, said yes immediately and doubled Urban's salary for good measure. The result was the largest cannon anyone had ever built, 9 meters long, capable of firing a stone ball weighing 500 kilos for a distance of over 1.5 kilometers. It was so enormous that it had to be transported from Edirne to Constantinople on a specially constructed cart pulled by 60 oxen and attended by 200 men. It could only fire 7 times a day. Loading and cooling it took hours. But when it fired, the entire city shook. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. The Ottoman army materialized outside Constantinople's walls like a dark tide. 100,000 soldiers, 145 ships blockading the harbor. The largest cannon in the world aimed directly at the Theodosian walls. And inside the city, defending all of it, approximately 7,000 men, Greek soldiers, Venetian sailors who had chosen to stay when their fleet arrived, Genoese troops under the remarkable Giovanni Giustiniani, a condottiero who had used his personal fortune to recruit and equip 700 soldiers for this campaign. There were Catalan mercenaries, Cretan archers, even a Scottish engineer named Johannes Grant, who had been digging counter-tunnels beneath the walls to detect and collapse Ottoman mining operations. 7,000 people from a dozen different nations holding the walls of a civilization. For 53 days they held. Every day the great cannon fired. Every morning the defenders looked at the damage done to the walls overnight and went to work filling the holes with timber, earth and rubble before the next barrage. The Ottomans attacked again. The defenders repelled them. The Ottomans fired the cannon. The walls cracked. The defenders repaired the walls. Again and again and again. It was the world's most exhausting loop of destruction and resilience. And astonishingly, the defenders were winning, or at least surviving, which in those circumstances amounted to the same thing. Mehmed tried everything. He attempted to drag his fleet overland, greasing wooden rollers and hauling 70 ships across hills and forests to bypass the great chain blocking the Golden Horn harbor. It worked. It was an audacious, almost surreal military maneuver, and it worked. But even with ships now in the Golden Horn, the city held on. By late May, Mehmed himself was beginning to doubt. His commanders were restless. The siege was in its 7th week, with no end in sight. Supplies were running low on the Ottoman side too. There were rumors that a Christian relief fleet was coming. On the evening of May 27th, Mehmed convened his war council and seriously considered negotiating. One of his commanders, the fiery Zagan Pasha, stood up and declared that to retreat now would be a disgrace they would never recover from. The council agreed. The final assault would come on the night of May 28th. One last, total effort. Everything, all at once. Now. This is the moment where we pause and ask you something. You are on that wall. You have been there for 53 days. You are exhausted, you are underfed, you are outnumbered 14 to 1. You have watched friends die. You have repaired the same section of wall 17 times. And now the drums are starting again. What do? If you would have stayed and fought to the end with Constantine, like the soldier you wish you were, hit that like button. And drop a comment telling us, what would you have done on Constantinople's last night? Would you have stayed on the wall or slipped away through the harbor? There are no wrong answers here. History is full of very smart people who chose to live. This is the time machine. Subscribe and step back into the moments that made the world. On the evening of May 28, 1453, something extraordinary happened inside the city. Word spread through Constantinople's streets that tonight was the night. The final assault was coming. And what the citizens of this dying empire chose to do with their last hours before the storm is one of the most haunting scenes in all of medieval history. They went to Hagia Sophia. They went to the great church, Greeks and Latins together. And understand what that means, because these two communities had spent the last decade in bitter theological warfare. The Orthodox Byzantines despised the Catholic Church and the union that their emperor had signed with Rome in a desperate attempt to secure military help. There had been riots over it. Orthodox clergy had called it heresy. The Megaduke Lucas Notaras, second in command of the Byzantine military, had reportedly said that he would rather see the turban of the Sultan in the city than the cardinal's hat of the Pope. That is how deep the hatred ran. And yet, on the night of May 28, 1453, they all walked into Hagia Sophia together. Catholics and Orthodox, soldiers and civilians, the emperor and the fishermen. They lit every candle in the building. The priests chanted. The mosaics of Christ and the Virgin Mary glowed in the firelight. People wept openly. The choir sang vespers into the golden dark, and outside, at a distance, you could already hear the drums beginning. Emperor Constantine the Palaiologos received communion that night. He knelt in that church, this man who was the last in an unbroken line of Roman emperors stretching back more than 1,000 years. This man who carried the weight of civilizations on a frame of 50 years and 49 days of siege, and he received the sacrament like any common man. Then he went around the room. He embraced his commanders. He asked forgiveness for any offense he might have caused. He said goodbye without calling it goodbye, and then he walked out into the night. According to the chronicler Macarius, who was present, Constantine addressed his men one final time before taking his position at the walls. He told them they were fighting not just for a city, but for their faith, their families, and for the idea of civilization itself. He told them the honor of their courage would outlast whatever happened to their bodies. He took his position at the Lycus Valley section of the Theodosian walls, the most vulnerable, most battered section of the entire defensive line. And he waited. He did not flee. He never seriously considered it. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because in the modern world, we have become very sophisticated about the value of self-preservation and very comfortable with the idea that a clever man knows when to cut his losses. Constantine had been offered terms. Mehmed II had sent messengers throughout the siege offering safe passage and the preservation of the city's population if Constantine would simply surrender. Constantine's response was essentially, "I cannot surrender a city that is not mine alone to give." He meant it. He understood, in a way that perhaps only someone raised to be the last guardian of a 1,000-year-old civilization can understand, that some things are not negotiable, not because the math makes sense, but because some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. He was going to die on that wall. He had known it for weeks. He had chosen it anyway. Shortly before midnight on May 28th, Mehmed launched his assault. It came in waves, deliberately designed to exhaust the defenders before the main force arrived. First, Mehmed sent in the Bashibazouks, irregular troops, barely trained, essentially expendable human waves. Their role was not to breach the walls. Their role was to tire out the defenders, drain their ammunition, and absorb punishment so that the real soldiers could fight fresh men who were already weary. Behind the Bashibazouks stood Ottoman military police with whips and swords, making retreat more dangerous than advance. This was Ottoman siege doctrine at its most coldly efficient. Use the dispensable to wear down the indispensable. The Bashibazouks were driven back after 2 hours of savage fighting. The defenders had held, but the cost was visible in their faces and their shaking arms. Then came the Anatolian regulars, trained, disciplined, fresh. They hit the walls hard and drove deep in several places before leaving. The defenders had been fighting for over 3 hours. Their hands were cramped, their eyes burned. The night air was thick with smoke and screaming, and still they held. Then, Mehmed committed the Janissaries. The Janissaries were the elite infantry of the Ottoman Empire, possibly the most disciplined fighting force in the world at that moment. They were soldiers who had been taken as boys from Christian families, including many Byzantines, and raised from childhood to be nothing other than warriors. They advanced in perfect formation, in absolute silence, without drums. The silence was worse than the drums. They hit the walls at the precise point where Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who had been the backbone of the land wall defense for 53 days, was standing. And then something happened that changed everything. Giustiniani was hit. Whether it was a crossbow bolt, a musket ball, or debris from a cannon, historians still argue, the wound was severe enough to put the most important man on the Byzantine side out of action. He asked, and here is the part that haunts every account of that night, he asked Emperor Constantine for the key to the inner gate so he could be carried to the harbor and taken to his ship. Constantine reportedly begged him to stay. The situation was critical. The sight of their commander leaving would shatter morale. Giustiniani, exhausted, bleeding, perhaps in shock, insisted. Constantine gave him the key. Giustiniani was carried out. And exactly as Constantine had feared, the Genoese troops who had been holding the walls with their lives saw their commander leave and began to waver. The line buckled. At that exact moment, something happened at a gate called the Cercaporta. The Cercaporta was a small sally port in the northern section of the walls, a side gate used for sortie operations. Somehow, in the chaos of the night, it had been left unlocked. A patrol of Ottoman irregulars found it, pushed it open, and walked into Constantinople. They climbed to the top of the nearest tower and raised an Ottoman flag. Defenders on other sections of the wall saw the Ottoman banner flying inside the city, and the news spread like fire. The Turks are inside. The Turks are inside. Panic is its own kind of weapon. Men who had held the walls for 53 nights, who had survived cannon fire and wave assaults and everything Mehmed could throw at them, broke when they saw that flag and understood what it meant. The defense collapsed not with a crash but with a sigh, the way a great building does not explode but simply settles into itself when the last support fails. Ottoman troops poured through the breached walls, through the open Cercaporta, through every gap they had spent weeks trying to make. By 5 in the morning of May 29, 1453, the city was lost. Constantine V saw it happening. He understood instantly. There was no rally possible, no line to reform, no last-minute salvation coming. There was only the choice of how to end it, and he made his choice with a clarity that has echoed across 6 centuries. He tore off his imperial purple robes, the robes that marked him as the heir of Augustus and Constantine the Great, the living link to 1,200 years of Roman succession, and he drew his sword. Still wearing his red leather imperial boots, which were the one piece of regalia he kept, he charged into the mass of Ottoman soldiers pouring into the city. His companions charged with him. No one saw him die. In the chaos and the darkness and the screaming, the last emperor of the Romans simply vanished into the tide. Days later, when Mehmed's men searched the piles of fallen defenders, they found a body identified as Constantine's only by the imperial eagle embroidered on his red boots. They showed the boots to Mehmed. He is said to have wept. He had respected his opponent. He had wanted him alive, had sent offers of honorable treatment right up until the end. Constantine had declined them all. By sunrise on May 29, 1453, Constantinople belonged to the Ottomans. The city that had held off the world for 1,100 years had fallen in a single night, through a combination of overwhelming force, one man's wound, and an unlocked door. History has a sense of humor, and it is not kind. What followed was 3 days of looting. Mehmed had promised his soldiers the traditional 3 days of pillage as reward for the conquest, a standard practice of medieval siege warfare, though no less devastating for being standard. Civilians who had crowded into Hagia Sophia praying for a miracle found none. Women and children were taken as slaves. Men were killed or captured. Libraries that held manuscripts of ancient texts, works by Aristotle, Plato, and others that existed nowhere else in the world, were burned or scattered. Scholars who survived fled west, carrying their knowledge with them. Some historians argue that this diaspora of Byzantine intellectuals bringing ancient Greek texts into Italy helped ignite the Renaissance. If true, it means that the death of one civilization accidentally fertilized the birth of another. That is either beautiful or monstrous depending on your perspective, and possibly both. Mehmed entered Constantinople on May 29th and went directly to Hagia Sophia. He stood inside the greatest church in the world, the building that had stood for 900 years, whose dome had seemed to the Byzantine historian Procopius to hang suspended from heaven by a golden chain, and he converted it into a mosque on the spot. He declared himself Caesar of the Romans. He moved his capital from Adrianople to Constantinople, renamed it Istanbul, and set about transforming the crumbling Byzantine ruin into the gleaming capital of the world's most powerful empire. He rebuilt it. He repopulated it. He brought in craftsmen, merchants, and scholars from across his empire. Within decades, Istanbul was once again one of the most magnificent cities on earth. Mehmed the Conqueror understood, as great leaders sometimes do, that a city's soul lives in its stones even when its people have changed. And yet in Greece they still call May 29th a day of mourning. In Orthodox churches around the world, the fall of Constantinople is remembered as a wound that has never fully closed. There is a legend, persistent, beautiful, almost certainly not true, and absolutely true in every way that matters, that when the Ottomans entered Hagia Sophia, the priest who was celebrating the divine liturgy walked into the church's eastern wall, which opened to receive him, and will emerge to finish the liturgy when Constantinople is Christian again. The wall is still waiting. The priest is still inside. And then there is the legend of Constantine himself, the marble king, they call him in Greek folklore. The story says he did not die, that an angel descended at the last moment, carried him to the golden gate of the city, and turned him to marble, sleeping, waiting, preserved, until the day comes when he will wake and reclaim his city. They say he sleeps beneath the walls still, red boots on his stone feet, sword in his stone hand, dreaming the dreams of an empire. History, of course, says he died, charging into Ottoman spears with his sword drawn. But history and legend are not always enemies. Sometimes legend is just what history looks like to the people who loved it. What does the fall of Constantinople mean? It means the end of the Roman Empire, the actual, direct, unbroken succession from Augustus Caesar, after approximately 1400 years of continuous existence. It means the effective end of the Middle Ages, as European historians now date the beginning of the early modern period from 1453. It means that the Ottoman Empire became the dominant power from the Balkans to Anatolia to the Arab world, a position it would hold for 4 more centuries. It means that European trade routes to Asia were disrupted, pushing Spanish and Portuguese explorers to find new paths west across the Atlantic, paths that would lead, within 40 years, to the European encounter with the Americas. In a very real sense, the fall of a city on the Bosphorus led to the colonization of continents on the other side of the world. History is never local, and it means something else, something harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. It means that institutions which seem eternal, empires, civilizations, walls built to last forever, are not. It means that the right combination of pressure, genius, accident, and one unlocked door can bring down what 1,000 years of siege could not. It means that the things we build with confidence and love and the expectation of permanence are always, at some level, fragile. Constantinople stood for 11 centuries. It fell in one night. The fall was not inevitable. There were a dozen moments where different choices might have led to different ends. If Giustiniani had stayed on the wall, if the Kirkoporta had been locked, if the West had sent the promised armies, if Constantine had accepted the Ottoman terms and lived. History is made of these impossible ifs. But it also means this: in the face of absolute certainty of defeat, a man took off his crown and picked up his sword. He did not negotiate. He did not flee. He walked into the dark with the people who had trusted him, and he did not come back. Say what you will about Constantine V of Palaiologos, and historians have been arguing about him for 5 centuries. But in that last hour, he was exactly what a last emperor should be. The Roman Empire began with Augustus. It ended with Constantine. The symmetry is almost too perfect to be accidental, which is perhaps why history allowed it. 6 centuries later, we still stand on this wall with him. We still ask ourselves what we would have done. We still argue about the unlocked gate and the wounded general and the flag raised in the wrong place at the wrong moment. We still carry some version of Constantinople inside us. The idea that there are things worth defending past the point where the math makes sense, that some walls are worth standing on even when the fires below stretch to the horizon. You were there on Constantinople's last night. You felt the stones beneath your hands and the drums in your chest and the cold air of a May morning that was about to become the morning after the end of the world. You saw the fires. You heard the horns. You watched the last emperor walk out of Hagia Sophia into the dark. And now you know, empires end, walls fall. But the people who stood on them, exhausted, outnumbered, and still there, are remembered. This has been the time machine. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something for men and women who have been dust for 6 centuries, then you are exactly why we make this channel. Leave us a comment. Tell us who you think about when you think about Constantinople. Tell us what you would have done. Tell us what empire you're standing inside right now, wondering how long it will last. And subscribe, because history is happening all around you, every single day. And we are here to make sure you never stop seeing it. The machine is ready. The next destination is waiting. The time machine. Step back, understand everything.